Hi everybody, welcome back to Art on the Creek. My name is Anne and we are in mid-February and we're still continuing our backyard birds. Last time we did an owl and I'm filming this actually in January. So this morning in January, in the past version of me, this is kind of like a time warp, we finally got some Juncos. These are just the cutest, and I have a cute story to tell you about my dog that used to play with the Juncos, but everybody's got these just about everywhere. I know that they thrive in the Pacific Northwest and here in Colorado, and I'm betting just about everywhere in the United States. I'll have to look that up. But at any rate, they're cute little brown birds that like to hop around. Let's go paint some Juncos. You guys, I finally did it. I finally got some footage of these birds that I keep promising you are in my backyard. That one there is just coming out from under the pine tree that all of the birds and squirrels seem to just absolutely adore. It's almost like a hotel. And I just love their little footprints from when they hop. What they'll do is they'll kind of do a dance. They'll kind of like do a hip hop jive dance. They'll stand in the dirt or snow or the mulch on the ground there and kind of kick it out, just like a little towhee will. And I think they look for grubs and whatnot underneath there. But here we go. Here's going to be our reference today. I really like the way he's sitting in the pine tree. And I wanted to show you this one also. These are all from Pixabay because you can see the different colorations and how beautiful they are. And then here's our female. She's also quite pretty. And here's their range, all the way from Alaska down to almost the southern tip of Florida and just a little bit into Mexico. I've got my usual setup here. And let's see, I'm going to move my paints out of the way. Still using my studio paints, which are a mix of M. Graham, Daniel Smith, and Holbein. I do have a Winsor Newton in there and some Core, I think, for this project, for this month. And I'm going to go ahead and tape this off again because I have this washi tape I need to use up. And I'm still using my Arches cold press, 100% cotton travel journal. I'm absolutely in love with this journal, and as I mentioned in one of the videos before, I think I really am going to get some more of these as soon as I use up all of my paper. I really want to use things up this year. I'm not on a no-buy. I know a lot of people do that. They like to just have a certain amount of time where they just don't buy anything. I'm just on a use what you have. Because I don't want to say I'm not going to buy anything. What if something's too irresistible? Okay. But no, I'm going to be firm with myself because I really do have quite a bit. I have quite a bit to show you guys in reviews on Saturdays, and we have quite a bit to work on here. So having a use what you have is a good idea. So I'm trying to use up my washi tape. All right. I have several pictures of Juncos that we've just covered. You can use a compilation of these or what have you. I really like the one sitting in the pine tree. And I think this is a male. You know what their little heads remind me of? Penguins. So this story about our dog, I've got the drawing sped up on double time so I can tell you this story real quick. Her name was Sasha. She just passed away last October. She was a Shiba Inu, and my studio buddy, she's dearly missed. We don't have a dog right now, so my pets are these birds. What she used to do was so cute. Okay, so these Juncos, they would nest on our back deck. I had some pots with some plants in them, and the plants stayed green all year round. It was really thick, lush greenery. And these birds, I don't know how evolutionarily they have survived because they chose to nest in these pots. The pot was maybe 14 inches tall, so not even up to my knee, and easily attainable by any predator. But Sasha would go out there and stick her face in the pot. And she had no desire to get those babies. She did this after the babies were even born. She had no desire to get the babies. She had no desire to eat any eggs. What she wanted was for those parents to swoop down and buzz her head, and then she would chase them around the yard. And, they hated her. They thought she was a horrible menace, but she thought it was the funnest thing in the world. She would put her head in the plant and her eyes would be looking around for the birds. She was very gentle with the babies. I think she knew they were in there, but she had no desire to get them. But she would want these adults to come and just peck her head, and then she'd run around, and she thought that was the funnest game in the world. So that's a Sheba for you. Very clever, very creative, and oh, so dearly missed. Sasha was with us for 14 and a half years, and she was true till the end. That dog was really something special. I've had a lot of dogs in my life, Labradors, Springer Spaniels, and Sasha, our Sheba, and that she left an indelible footprint, that's for sure. So you guys know how that is if you have a pet, I'm sure. Well, now that we've got the drawing done, let's get on with the painting here. I'm using my Series 7 Finest Sable from Winsor & Newton, and I really don't get a chance to use this brush too often, and it's simply because I just don't. I forget about it. I tend to forget about it because it's the only one that I have like it. Most of you know that the Princeton Neptunes are my go-to selection for brushes, and I also love the Tracy Lemenzen. I'm going to try and use this one more this year. That was one of my goals, just to see if I wanted to get more. For this brown on the wings there, I'm just kind of getting a base coat of shadows in. I'm trying to do something entirely different on this one. So this is a bit of an experiment. We're going to throw a lot of things at it, and we'll see how it comes out in the end. As I'm doing this voiceover, I'll give you a spoiler alert. I do like the way it came out, but the way that I chose to do it, the order in which I chose to do it, you could do it in many different ways. But this one works. So let's let's proceed forth and see where we're at. So that brown shadowy feathers are there on the wings to create that dimension ahead of time. And now I've done that, splaying out the bristles, and I've gone into some ultramarine to create the shadows on his white breast feathers there. And the gray that I'm going to mix for his head is going to be that ultramarine, and I'm mixing it with a transparent red iron oxide. Both of those shades are Daniel Smith. Just happen to be, you don't have to mix like brands with like brands. You can mix whatever watercolor with whatever watercolor you like. What I wanted to do was to create a gray that would have a lot of dimensionality in it, because when you look at his head, it has some gray tones, some light blue tones, a little bit of brown in there. And what I really wanted to do was try and capture that with the paint. And I think it came out pretty well. I had to finagle these layers a little bit as I was going along, but I think I got it to work pretty well. And, I have not used this brush in so long, so I almost felt like there was a bit of a learning curve with the amount of water that this brush held. It's extremely soft. It's very pliable. Like you don't have that feedback that you do from the Neptunes because they are synthetic. But this one was truly, again, just a pleasure to work with. Now what I'm just mixing there was a Naples yellow and the red iron oxide, because I wanted to have some little warm light coming from the wings, and that Naples yellow with red iron oxide really creates that nice warm dark orange. And so that's the next color for the wings. And there you can see on his head how those pigments are separating, and it's really neat. It's just creating a wonderful little base for that, for his feathers. And I'm trying to get a little bit of the feathers going down over his white chest there, and that ended up working very well, just splaying these bristles apart. That's one thing that I really loved about this brush, was that when you rotated it on the palette, and then let those bristles splay out, they really stayed out and apart for me. So I was able to do quite a bit with that effect. So let's move on to the next part and see where we're at. I've skipped over the part where I just repeated everything you've just seen so far in another layer. So that's 2 layers of what you just saw on the bird's head and on his wings now. And I've mixed more of that olive green and the dioxazine purple, because now I'm going to replicate those shadows in the wings while making pine branches. And if you'll notice, I want to slow this down so that you can see, I'm rotating the brush left to right in my between my thumb and forefinger, because that creates a really uneven line, and it's just kind of natural. You don't really have to think about it. When you're doing branches, I always tell people this little bit of advice, because it was the best advice that anyone ever gave to me, so I want to pass it on to you. Don't do too many, because if you get too many branches in there, it can look like cracked glass. It's just one of those things that branches can tend to be a little bit too similar. So that's another thing. You want to make sure you vary the length of the branches, vary the direction that they're pointing. There's a lot of different tricks you can do. And I was really, when I was doing this, I was really looking at the reference photo to just make sure that I got the twists and turns of the pine branch very similar to the way that they occur in nature, because that's another thing that's so funny. Our powers of observation are so helpful to us as artists. And you say, paint what you see. Well, that power of observation really does boil down to looking at things extremely carefully. And part of that has to do with color, and that's what we're doing here with this Hooker's Green. I'm mixing that with the dioxazine purple. So again, I've used the purple in the feathers, in the tree trunks, and now in the pine boughs. This is the first layer of pine. I love mixing Hooker's Green and dioxazine purple to create a nice foresty green. I think it just has the perfect amount of dimension to it. It's a nice shadowy green with that purple in there. And this is often how I will do pine. I'll put either a light layer or a dark layer down first, and then go over that with the opposite, darker light, And in this case, I did a dark layer first, and then I went over it with a lighter green, and then ultimately we will go over it with a very thick viscosity of the Hooker's Green to give it its final layer. Pine branches are so enjoyable to paint. I love how you can let this brush was really made it easy too, by the way. It held just the right amount of pigment, so that by the time I got to kind of midway through the branch or toward the end, I was getting some natural dry brush effect. And that really created some lovely opportunity for light play and different depths. And I think it added a lot of dimension to the pine tree needles without letting them be flat. So in some of these strokes here, you'll probably see how they really turned into more of a dry brush. I know I'm holding my brush kind of straight up and down, and my hand is probably in the way, but I'm hoping you can see some of that. For those of you who may not be quite familiar with the term dry brush, what that is your brush isn't really dry. It's just that it doesn't have enough moisture on it to make a smooth stroke across the paper. So it just kind of leaves not a dotted line, but it leaves white space in the paint that you're putting down. And you can do the dry brush technique like this with very little pigment on your brush, or you can do it as I've done in some other videos where you hold the brush parallel to the paper instead of perpendicular, like I'm doing right now, and you rub the belly of the brush along the surface of the paper, and then it picks up those ridges. So I thought it needed another branch up here, so I'm going to go ahead and add that one in, and then I will pick up again in just a few minutes. Now at this point here, I have gone around those pine branches, and I've mixed in some Hansa Yellow Deep with that same Hooker's Green and dioxazine purple mix. So it's a little bit lighter shade of green, but it's still in that rich pine family. I like to start all pine trees with that Hooker's Green and dioxazine purple. And then I vary it with different shades of, different amounts of the yellow to get it to work out. So now I'm going in and doing his beak, and I will be honest with you, the beak gave me a little bit of trouble, and it was so frustrating. I think I just had too much water on my brush when I did this. And like I said, I'm relatively new to this brush, and even though it comes to a beautiful point, I think I just had too much water in the belly of it. It holds quite a bit. It was almost just not used to driving this one around, so I will have to play with it some more. I switched to a number 2, and the one I grabbed happened to be Princeton Heritage. So this one is a synthetic, I think it's Taclon, this one. And it really hardly holds any moisture at all in comparison. So I had to play with that then too, which I knew. I'm very familiar with the Heritage. So, it was just a matter of trying to blot it off and start over as I'm doing here, which sometimes you have to do that. That's okay. Just in order to get that yellow the right shade and have it cooperate. But let's skip forward again and catch up on the next location. So I finally got that beak to cooperate. I went in with that Naples yellow, and then I just used straight red iron oxide to get the shading in it. And then I will go in eventually with some watercolor pencil and adjust it again. And now I've got my number 2 brush dipped in the ultramarine and red iron oxide mix, and I'm just defining some of those feathers, kind of trying to get some black layers on here, because when you look at his head, there's an awful lot of variance in the shading here, and I just wanted to make sure that I kind of could reflect that. And the colors that I've mixed with this black, now I know ultramarine and burnt sienna is so popular to mix, but I really like this red iron oxide, and I think it's because it's a PR 101 instead of a PBR 7. The burnt sienna PBR 7 is a pigment brown, number 7, and then this one is PR 101, which some companies will use as a burnt sienna, but Daniel Smith uses it as their transparent red iron oxide. I've just found it to be absolutely fabulous for mixing a black that's not quite, it's almost like a deep charcoal gray, which tends to my eye, to look really nice when you're dealing with nature. Now you can see here I've already put in that final layer for the pine branches, and I decided to go with the thick layer of Hooker's green on the top there, so you can see how that creates such a nice rounded depth to the pine boughs there. And then what I was doing with that number 2 is the number 2 Princeton Heritage brush is I had gone into that olive green again, the mix with the dioxazine purple, and just kind of drug it along the paper there to create that woody texture of the branches themselves that are holding the pine needles. So that helped to give that final bit of dimension that we needed. Now let's have some fun. This is the part where I think you could do this first instead of filling the background in between these pine needles, but I want to explain myself and show you why I decided to do it this way, because I think it did kind of add to it. I was realizing at this point that everything was in the same level of focus, and I needed to blur out some of those branches to help bring that bird forward. So what I decided to do was to take some of my watercolor pencils. I have this set of Faber-Castell, set of 12, and then I've got a few random pencils sitting in my little pencil holder here. And I'm first going in with the brown from the Faber-Castell set and just kind of adding suggestions of branches, not drawing branches, just the color brown. Because I knew that when I paint this, I will catch some of the tips of the pine boughs, if not some of the body of them, and blur it out. And that will help soften those pine boughs, take them out of focus, and put them more in the background. So that's what I was trying to do here, was to use the watercolor pencils to my advantage, have the background lighter since the bird is pretty dark, and at the same time push part of those pine boughs to the back. This one that I'm using now is a Spectrum Noir. It's a clay color pencil, and now this one is a phthalo blue Faber-Castell. Just using that to get the shadows going on those feathers a little bit. This is another way that I really like to add texture and dimension to drawings to paintings, is to go in and use the side of a colored pencil, or in this case, a watercolor pencil, because that also will pick up the peaks on the ridges of the paper, and it will give it a nice uneven coloring. So you really get that variegated layer there. And here you can see how when I wet the area where I use the watercolor pencil, I hope you can see this, every now and then I will catch the tips of the pine needles just very gently, but yet intentionally, like right up there on the right, you could probably see that. And that blurred out that pine needle a little bit, so it pushed it back into the background. I decided to err on the side of caution when I was using those watercolor pencils, because I can always go in and do more. I can always make it darker. But I really did want to keep it very delicate and light. And I will tell you that is not my nature with paint. I like to go in bold and strong. So I was really trying to be conservative. And I'm so glad I did, because I really just think the background came out very perfect for what I was trying to go for. Just getting this dry now here, because it's going to be time to add some snow. Now that I've got that really dry on the front and the back, just to be sure, I really wanted it to be dry all the way through, I found a Derwent Graphitint pencil. I had no idea I even had this. I'm so excited. So I've never used this before. I want to try it and see how much pigment it'll lay down. So I thought the first place I would try would be on the nose, and look at that at the tip of his beak. You can really get quite a lot of pigment to come out of here. I was so excited. So I'm using it for the highlight feathers, and I'll go in and I'll lay down just a little bit of highlight on the sides of his head and the top of his head here where the feathers appear just a little bit lighter. And I'll show you a really fun technique that I use sometimes just to make things a little bit lighter, to blend them a little bit. So at any rate, I love this pencil. I'm going in and just adding some of the white feathers, making that layer a little softer of the black feathers as it goes over onto his white feathers, making sure I've got all the highlights there. And here's a little spot I see on the side of his neck, on the side of his face there, and then getting a little bit on his cheek. Now I'm just dipping my finger into the water and I'm just very gently smudging that around. That is giving it exactly the amount of blend that I was looking for. I was so happy, and I was very leery to use the brush because I didn't want to disturb the pigment that was under there. So I used my finger, and I was so happy with the way that it turned out. So let's move on to the next part. I was having so much fun with this graphitint pencil and wanting to put down this snow. I was loving the texture that I was able to get. To me, it looked like the branch was peeking through the snow, which technically it truly is because the pigment is mostly sticking to the highest peaks on this textured paper. It's just cold press. I don't know if I mentioned that. It's not rough textured. It is cold press. But I'm using the side of the pencil to just kind of roughly sketch in the snow here. And I'm sorry I'm zoomed in too close. Let's see if I can zoom ahead. So I wanted to compare it with the Faber-Castell white watercolor pencil, and it's not laying down any pigment, comparatively speaking. So I'm going back to that Derwent graphitint. I just think these are phenomenal. This is definitely on my list for the next thing to buy when I feel like I can invest in some more art supplies. The graphitint pencils, I'm so looking forward to those. Now, much of this is still going to be on extreme close-up, and I apologize. I got so involved in what I was doing, I forgot to check the focus of the camera. But I'm going into my bleed-proof white with that same paintbrush and getting it good and juicy because I'm going to splatter some snow on here. There's snow on the branches, but I wanted snow to be falling, so what you can't tell is this is the top of the picture. There we go. I've covered the bird with paper towel just so he doesn't have to get splatters on him yet. I do want to have snow on him, but not yet. So now I'm doing the bottom. And now I've removed those paper towel protection pieces, and I'm just giving it a light splatter of snow all over. Let me see if I can zoom a little bit to the end, and you can see how I've done the shadows on the snow because it worked out really well. Now, in order to get that varied texture of the snow itself, what I did when I was laying that down, that is bleed-proof white that I've added on there, is I kind of rolled the brush around. Now I'm going in with that green because I did have some of that in the background. I just wanted to add just a little bit here and there to the needles. Now I have the light ultramarine Faber-Castell watercolor pencil, and the thing that I love about these is that they're all at least 3 stars light fastness rating, and that they're just wonderful to work with. They're so soft. I'm just following the natural contours of that textured snow that I put in. Now it's not like a full-bodied acrylic texture. It's just where the shadows are naturally occurring, and I'm accentuating those shadows with the light ultramarine on the side of this pencil. And as I zoom out, you can see that I've added some shadows under the bird, deep in the pine, and also on the snow to separate it from the white chest of the bird there. So I'm signing it with my favorite fountain pen, and I really like the way this one came out. I hope you guys had a chance to paint the Jumpin' Jivin' Junco with me. And if you do, tag me on Instagram because I'd really like to see your work. I had a lot of fun using these Faber-Castell, the Albrechter watercolor pencils. I tend to not use them. This was kind of a fun one because I got out some supplies that I just don't often use. And I'm so glad I did, and I hope that if you have some art supplies hanging around your studio, wherever you paint, that you haven't used in a while, dig them out, see what you can create. I think you'll be pretty surprised with the results. I sure had fun painting with you today, and I hope you did too. You guys have a wonderful day. We'll see you next week with our next bird. Take care.